Chapter 5, Operation Moonlight. In the early 1960s, tensions between the Eastern and Western blocs culminated in a frantic race for space. The Americans need a coup. The Soviet Union has taken the lead with Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin. Washington cannot lose the symbolic battle for the moon. Rumors circulated within the very closed circles of the CIA and DARPA. The study of the Roswell debris had made it possible to model a primitive form of artificial intelligence, and the sudden evolution of consumer electronics was a result. But the public must never know. The challenge is immense. Sending men to the moon with nascent, shaky technology, feasible on paper, but terribly risky. It was then that Stanley Kubrick's name was suggested by a Pentagon advisor. He was working on a groundbreaking science fiction film project with NASA, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Kubrick was an obsessive, perfectionist, and highly secretive genius. He was presented with the idea of a discrete parallel filming of a filmed version of the moon landing, in case the mission failed or could not be properly broadcast. He accepted, probably thinking of it as a simple backup to be inserted into a documentary. The scenes were filmed in a camouflaged military studio in the Nevada desert. The lighting, the lunar dust, the angles, everything was carefully crafted down to the smallest detail. Stand-ins were trained to simulate the astronauts' movements. Kubrick, believing he was serving art and science, had no idea that these images would be broadcast live, completely replacing the actual footage from the lunar module, which was unable to transmit properly. On the evening of July 20th, 1969, humanity held its breath. Armstrong set foot on the moon. Millions of television viewers applauded in awe. But in the shadows, only a handful of men knew what was real and what wasn't. The control center in Houston was communicating with Apollo 11. The voice transmissions were authentic, but the image came from ground, from a studio, filmed by Kubrick. Kubrick, later learning that his film had served as an illusion for all humanity, plunged into voluntary isolation. His film 2001 was already in theaters. He slipped into it, barely veiled, symbols, forms, ideas that he would never have dared to express publicly. The monolith, HAL 9000, the awakening, the cycle of death and rebirth. So many encrypted messages that only those in the know can glimpse. Thus concludes Operation Moonlight. A technical success, a political victory, but a silent betrayal. The transistor, the processor, and perhaps the founding lie of the digital age. Chapter 6, The President's Plans. When Ronald Reagan, then governor of California, gave a speech in 1974 in which he evoked the possibility of a common threat to all humanity, observers paid little attention to his words. He speaks of a potential danger from space, capable of transcending our differences and forcing global cooperation. The idea seems far-fetched at the time, yet this theme would regularly recur in his speeches, eventually becoming an unofficial pillar of his geopolitical vision. When Reagan became president in January 1981, he inherited an America in the midst of the Cold War, obsessed with the arms race. But he quickly brought a new impetus, a vision in which technology could protect the nation not only against Soviet missiles, but also against more elusive threats. Thus, in 1983, the Strategic Defense Initiative (SDI) was born, which the media would dub Star Wars. Officially, the plan is to establish a system of space-based anti-missile shields. Unofficially, the project covers a much broader scope. Some internal documents, now partially declassified, report confidential briefs sent to the White House, describing the detection of unidentified objects in high orbit, gravitational anomalies, and even unexplained electromagnetic interference. Military sources even mention stationary structures being observed in cislunar space. The SDI would therefore also have been conceived as an advanced observation program, capable of intercepting or neutralizing any form of threat, whether of human origin or not. Reagan, a science fiction enthusiast, nurtured his vision of a future where humanity might find itself confronted with something much larger than itself. He then uttered this famous sentence before the UN General Assembly in 1987. I often wonder how quickly our differences would disappear if we faced an alien threat. Behind the scenes, SDI encompasses research projects conducted by leading military contractors, Hughes Aircraft, Lockheed, Raytheon, and others. Work is underway on particle weapons systems, orbital lasers, quantum sensors, and forms of communication inspired by phenomena observed since the 1950s. Some components, derived from studies of Roswell debris or other similar incidents, are discreetly tested. The link between SDI and the supposedly exotic technologies is never publicly established, but the overlaps are disturbing. Within the military-industrial complex, several researchers are beginning to speak informally of external intelligence, not in the sense of espionage, but as knowledge from elsewhere. A coded expression to evoke the non-terrestrial inspirations that seem to guide certain technological developments. But soon, obstacles appeared. The program's astronomical costs drew criticism from Congress, and some experiments seemed to produce strange side effects, uncontrolled resonances, magnetic disturbances, and unexplained incidents on certain test platforms. Alarming reports are circulating, describing abnormal behavior of certain prototypes, as if they were affected by an internal logic disconnected from our classical models. Faced with this accumulation of gray areas, the SDI was gradually dismantled in the 1990s. Officially, for diplomatic and budgetary reasons, in a context of post-Soviet détente. Unofficially, because we were said to have skirted forbidden boundaries. Internal testimonies, which have remained confidential, speak of knowledge that cannot be wielded without consequences. The strategic defense initiative remains in the collective imagination today as an aborted technological utopia. But for some insiders, it was much more than that. The first attempt to admit, without saying so, that humanity is not alone, and that from now on, global politics must also deal with the invisible. Chapter 7. Roswell's AI. At the heart of the base, in an isolated, soundproofed hangar, work intensified around the recovered fragments. Mixed teams of civilians and military personnel worked there day and night. Among them were engineers from MIT and Bell Labs, as well as a few German scientists recovered during Operation Paperclip. What each of them saw before their eyes did not fit into any of the known technological classifications. A black, semi-transparent plaque, the size of a notebook, soon attracted everyone's attention. No wires, no chips, no identifiable components. Yet, she seemed to react. In a shielded room, the technicians exposed him to various electrical fields. Nothing appeared at first. But by bringing a simple oscilloscope probe within a few centimeters, a pattern appeared. A waveform, weak but stable. A signal, not a radio broadcast, nor background noise, but a regular autonomous signature. A clock without a source. It was as if the plate, in the presence of a field, briefly awoke, not to communicate, but to confirm its nature, that of a fragment still active, dormant, waiting for something. A young engineer, Thomas Rydell, proposed cooling the plate with liquid nitrogen. At minus 196 degrees Celsius, the object vibrated briefly, then displayed a faint, steady blue glow inside, invisible to the naked eye, but detectable by infrared. He recorded this behavior in his notebook, but his superiors ordered him not to discuss it. The discovery of a second fragment accelerated the hypothesis that was increasingly being whispered among insiders. The object was not a simple vessel, but an automated, unmanned probe. A probe with consciousness? The idea seemed delusional, but some believed it. The analyzed modules seemed to interact with each other through light pulses, similar to fiber optic signals, but miniaturized on an unprecedented scale. What if these black glass plates, so simple in appearance, were nothing other than logic circuits? A memory or a processor? The idea silently arises in the minds of a few brilliant minds. What if what we call a transistor is just a concept extracted from this technology? A naive copy of something much more complex? At the same time, another crucial piece was found. A sort of prism, black and smooth, rectangular, about 2 meters high. The same one that, years later, would appear in Kubrick's film. It emitted a constant, ultra-low frequency signal, barely detectable, but precise. This signal, once decoded, revealed a universal mathematical sequence, the first few digits of pi, followed by those of the square root of 2. A calling card. That was the trigger. This probe hadn't been sent here by chance. It was observing, and it had crashed by accident. Theories differed. Some believed it was an automatic beacon, triggered by the nuclear explosions of 1945. Others believed it was a surveillance system left dormant for millennia, awakened by a sudden change in the Earth's environment. But what very few knew was that a fragment of that AI, even damage, had survived. Not in the sense we understand it, no. It didn't speak. She didn't think like us, but she reacted weakly, like a wounded animal. A small group was tasked with isolating him in an armored cell at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They fed it periodically. They observed. Some reported strange temperature changes, slight fluctuating magnetic fields. Then nothing. Years passed until a scientist, working on a side project on semiconductors, was inspired by the patterns recorded in the signals emitted by the prism. This is how the first field effect transistor was born a few years later, by simply imitating a structure that was not understood. But no one ever spoke about the origin of inspiration. And above all, no one made the connection between HAL 9000, Kubrick's black monolith, and this silent fragment, forgotten in a military basement since 1947.